So I know I don't review video games, but this is something I've been waiting for a long time, so I thought I'd do a video about it. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, the new game from Team Reptile, which is the absolute tribute and spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio that we have been begging for. Well, I have been anyway. For a bit of history, Jet Set Radio was a game made by Sega that was originally released on the Dreamcast in 1999. It was... how do I describe this game? A mixture between a roller skating game and graffiti tagging? I mean, I really don't know how to describe this game. It's so unlike anything that has ever come before or after. It is so unique and it's so much fun. It's very stylish, has amazing music, and is so satisfying to play. The original on the Dreamcast is a little bit clunky, especially if you play it with the Dreamcast controller, which is not that great of a controller if I'm being perfectly frank. But it has been re-released on the Xbox, and let's be frank here, everybody who has played both agrees that Jet Set Radio Future on the original Xbox is far superior to the original. The first one was great, the second one basically perfected all of the elements that it had originally and made them amazing. The basic premise of both games is that you're a member of a Rudy gang, a group of street punks who basically go around tagging anything they can see in order to increase their dominance and gain more territory amongst other places. The gang that you're a part of is called the GGs, or Graffiti Gangsters, which is an amazing name, and you go up against other gangs like Poison Jam, the Love Shockers, the Immortals, the Noise Tanks, and others, and also having to compete with the police who are naturally trying to take you down, and the local government who always seem to have some kind of a side thing going on in these games. The Jet Set Radio franchise is my all-time favourite video game franchise, and Jet Set Radio Future is my favourite video game of all time. But tragically, they've only made 3 games. Well, 2.5 technically. There was one on Game Boy Advance, but it was just a reskin of a Tony Hawk game that Sega had made before, so it doesn't really count. It's gained a big cult following over the years, and people have been begging for a new one in the series, but unfortunately Sega's been sitting on it for years, along with other franchises that they've made that have been very popular, but they just never seem to want to make a new one. So it was up to indie developers Team Reptile to give us a new one. Team Reptile have done some games before, such as Megabyte Punch and Lethal League, both of which clearly took inspiration from Jet Set Radio, at least in terms of a stylistic means. They used that very colourful cel-shaded graphical style that Jet Set Radio used, and some of their music was even composed by Hideki Nakanuma, the same guy who did the music for Jet Set Radio. But for the past 2.5 years, I'd say, they've been working on this game, which is their magnum opus so far anyway, and meant to be the spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio that we've always wanted, as I said before. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. This is exactly what me and other Jet Set Radio fans have been wanting for years. It basically takes all the elements of Jet Set Radio and either improves on them or adds new elements that we've been wanting to see for years. The main draw of Jet Set Radio is how the entire world is basically your skating playground. There's tons of things to grind on, half pipes everywhere, and the whole idea is that there's this constant sense of forward momentum as you're going through the world, and you don't need to stop for anything. As fun as that was in the previous games, the most frustrating element was the fact that it was difficult to be precise with the game. You can only jump once, and sometimes the things are spaced a bit too far apart, so it's easy to miss and it'll mess up your combo, which is very annoying. This game, however, fixes that completely by giving you a boost mechanic where you can jump and then boost through the air. There was a boost mechanic in Jet Set Radio Future, but it didn't really increase your horizontal distance while jumping, whereas this one, there's the mid-air boost and there's also the mid-air super boost, which can increase your horizontal distance in both ways and increase your speed. And it is so satisfying, and it really helps make the game a lot more fun to play. It doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it does make it feel like it's less frustrating. There's also the way that you do graffiti in this game, which was a really cool idea. In the first game, you had to put in a bunch of console commands on the analog stick, like semicircles, up or down, which was okay, but again, considering the controls were a bit clunky, it was easy to mess it up, and again, it could be very frustrating. Annoyingly, in Jet Set Radio Future, they got rid of that entirely, and then all you had to do was press down the trigger button, which was one of the missteps of the game, because it made graffitiing a way too easy thing to do. I understand that they did it because they didn't want to kill your momentum while you're doing your thing, but still, they could have done it a more creative way. Like the way they did it in this game. In this game, each graffiti size has basically a bunch of dots, and you have to line up all the dots, which you can do in a very quick time, and it's very easy to do. And uniquely, each different way you do it gives you a different design, which is really clever. And like I said, it's done very quickly, so it doesn't mess up your momentum, which is brilliant. There's also the fact that you can actually get off the means of transportation that you're using in this game. And this game gives you three options. You've got inline skates, you've got skateboards, and you've got a BMX bike, which was a very clever idea. But you can press one of the trigger buttons and then you can just walk regularly, which was a brilliant idea, because again, one of the flaws with Jet Set Radio is that because you're constantly on skates, it's difficult to be precise when you're in tight areas. But with this one, if you need to get into a tight area, you can just get off what you're doing, walk like a regular person, and then get back on it when you want to actually do stuff, which is a great idea. And probably my favourite element of the game are the robo-posts, which are these kind of little statue things that kind of look like a mix between a robot with a big glove and those little cat wave bye-bye statues you see in China and Japan. Basically, if you can hit all of them in a certain area in one long combo, it'll unlock a door where you can then unlock extras like new graffiti, new vehicles, new shirts, etc., which I found amazingly satisfying, and it's a ton of fun to do. Honestly, I'd say in terms of gameplay, this is near perfection. I really do believe that this is exactly the kind of Jet Set Radio game that we've been wanting for years, and it is amazing. The only place where this game falls down a bit is in the stylistic elements, but even then only a tiny amount. In terms of music, Hideki Nakanuma does return to do the music, but he only gives us 4 songs this time, which is a bit disappointing considering that he does do amazingly good music, and he normally gave us a lot more in the previous games, but it still works pretty well, and they are really good songs, especially Can't Get Enough of You, which is an amazingly catchy tune, and I've been listening to it constantly since I played this game, and it is amazing. The other songs that they got for the game are good, but they don't quite stand out as much as the one in the previous games, but to be fair, anytime you play Jet Set Radio, you do tend to take away only 1 or 2 songs, and then the other ones kind of creep up on you, and then you realise, oh yeah, these are really good songs. So that's probably the same thing that's going to happen with this game too. I have put the soundtrack onto my iPod, and I have to admit, they do sound a lot better when I'm not trying to focus on doing a really good combo, so it's probably just a matter of I'm focusing on one element and not noticing the music as much. There's also the design element of the game. Jet Set Radio is one of those things where I like to consider the design complex simplicity, where the details are very complex, but the overall shape does seem to be very simple and very basic. It's difficult to kind of describe, but if you play the game and look at the designs, I think you'll be able to tell what I mean. This game does try to go for that similar thing, but I don't think they quite got the balance right. There are some designs that are a bit too simple and some designs that are a bit too complex. It does still look really good, and granted, this game's trying to be its own thing. It's not trying to actually be Jet Set Radio as a sequel. It's being its own thing that's inspired by Jet Set Radio, and I can appreciate that. But the designs of the characters that you play as, some of them are really cool, but they're not quite as memorable as the ones from Jet Set Radio. I mean, where's the guy holding a big ghetto blaster? I want to see that again. Although the graffiti designs, while again not quite as good as Jet Set Radio, are still really impressive to look at, and they are very satisfying when you're able to pull them off in-game. And some of the designs and concepts are still really cool. I mean, with the rival gangs, I don't think they're quite as interesting as the ones in Jet Set Radio. I mean, in Jet Set Radio you had monsters, you had living mummies that dress like Michael Jackson, and you had robots. This one, conceptually, they are very wacky, but they're not quite as interesting. With the exception of the old heads, they are brilliant. I love those guys. But yeah, they don't quite leave as much of an impression on you, but they are still very good designs, and I will admit that the main villain is an amazingly good design. I really like the way that guy looks. And the story actually, while I haven't beaten the game yet, is actually quite fascinating. I won't get into too much detail because it's one of those stories where there's a twist like every 5 minutes, so even if I explain a little bit, I'm probably spoiling a lot. But it is actually quite an interesting story, and while again it has the feel of something you would see in Jet Set Radio, this one actually feels like it's taking it to the next level and embracing the silliness. Jet Set Radio, both versions, do feel like they're taking the story a little bit too seriously and not acknowledging how silly it is. This one, it does really acknowledge how silly it is, but at the same time, the fact that it does still take it a bit seriously is actually quite entertaining. I know it's a bit difficult to explain, but again, if you play both versions, you know what I mean. Like I said, the only real flaws of this game are minor aesthetical elements, but in terms of the overall package, it's amazing, and so far it's my favourite game of the year. Of course, we still have some time to go, and Spider-Man 2 is yet to come out yet, which is the game that I'm really looking forward to. But I am really enjoying this game, and I'm glad that I picked it up, and I really recommend that you do too. But we'll see what I skate into next time.